The unexpected encounter. The twin suns of Nexus Prime cast a blistering glow over the vast, barren expanse of Volterra City, baking the cracked streets and towering structures beneath their fiery rays. Captain Liam Harper trudged through the city's dusty roads, his military-grade uniform heavy with the weight of the oppressive heat. Sweat dripped down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he had long since grown accustomed to the harsh conditions of alien worlds. The negotiations with the local merchant guild had been a disaster. What was supposed to be a simple agreement regarding trade routes had turned into a war of words and power plays. Volterra was a planet rich in resources, but its inhabitants were fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of outsiders. Liam had spent hours trying to navigate the labyrinth of politics, but in the end, it had all fallen apart. The guild was unwilling to compromise, and Liam had been forced to leave without any formal agreement. The only silver lining was that he was finally on his way back to his ship. The streets of Volterra City were mostly empty during the peak heat of the day. The few souls who remained were huddled in the shadows of the towering structures, seeking respite from the blistering sun. As Liam made his way toward the landing bay, he noticed a lone figure sitting in the shade of a crumbling building. The person appeared to be female, though something about her presence felt out of place in this harsh, desolate world. She was huddled against the wall, her back to the sun, her face hidden beneath the hood of a ragged cloak. Her skin, an ethereal shade of pale blue, seemed to shimmer faintly in the sunlight, almost as though it were made of liquid. Her silver hair hung loosely around her face, unkempt and wild, as if she had not seen the comfort of a bath or a proper home in ages. She was slender, fragile-looking, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, a grace that stood in stark contrast to the dirt-streaked clothing she wore. Liam slowed his pace as he drew closer. The woman's head tilted up slightly, and for the first time, their eyes met. Her gaze was piercing, silver eyes that seemed to glow faintly like liquid mercury, filled with both curiosity and wariness. There was something about her eyes that made him pause, something that tugged at him deep inside. Liam wasn't one to stop for every lonely wanderer or outcast on the streets, but there was something about this woman that made him hesitate. His boots shifted on the dusty ground as he stood still for a moment, watching her. There was an elegance to her, even in the midst of such squalor. Her face, while covered in dust and dirt, held an almost aristocratic beauty, as if she had once belonged to a world far removed from this one. Yet now she was alone, abandoned to the harsh reality of Volterra's desert streets. He took a step forward and called out, though his voice sounded odd, even to him, in the eerie silence that hung in the air. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone soft, but filled with genuine concern. He knew how dangerous these streets could be, especially for someone unprepared for the brutal conditions. The woman didn't respond immediately, her gaze flicking from Liam's face to the street around them, as though weighing her options. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice melodic and smooth, yet tinged with suspicion. "I am fine," she said, though her words lacked conviction. "I am merely waiting." Liam took another step closer, now within arm's reach of her. He could see the way she shivered ever so slightly beneath her cloak, her body showing signs of exhaustion, dehydration, and hunger. He had been on enough rough planets to recognize those signs. This was not just a casual wait. She was in distress, and it was clear she needed help. His hand instinctively reached into his pack, feeling for the last remaining bar of Sustain AUM, an energy-rich nutrient bar that was designed to keep humans going for days in harsh conditions. He had carried it for emergencies, but it was all he had left. He wasn't sure why, but something about this woman told him that it was the right moment to offer it. "Here," Liam said, his voice more urgent now. "Take it. It's all I have left, but it might help." He pulled the bar out and held it toward her. It wasn't much, a simple, chocolate-like sustenance bar, but it was better than nothing. In places like this, a single nutrient bar could mean the difference between survival and death. The woman eyed the bar warily, her silver eyes narrowing slightly, as though she were sizing him up. She hesitated for a moment, clearly skeptical. "Why would you give me this?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "People don't just give food away here." Liam smiled softly, shrugging his shoulders. "We all have our struggles. I've been in places where I didn't have enough to eat either. Sometimes helping others is the only thing that makes sense." There was a long pause as the woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she extended a hand, taking the bar from him with surprising grace. She didn't unwrap it immediately, though. Instead, she tucked it into the folds of her cloak, as if to keep it safe for later. Her eyes met his again, this time with a slightly softer gaze. "You are different from the others," she said, her tone curious yet cautious. "Humans are often selfish. I had not expected such kindness here." Liam felt a slight tug in his chest at her words, but before he could respond, she spoke again. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice quiet but insistent. "Liam Harper," he answered without hesitation. "I'm just an ambassador trying to do my job. But you look like you've seen better days." The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to consider his words, her gaze drifting away for a moment, lost in thought. After a few moments, she looked back at him, her eyes intense. "I will remember your kindness, Captain Harper," she said, her voice softer now, almost reverent. "People like you do not come often in this place." Liam blinked in surprise at her formal tone. It was clear now that this woman was no ordinary street dweller. There was something in her eyes that made him feel as though she had lived a life far removed from the harsh realities of this desert city. "I hope you find your way," Liam said, offering her a smile before turning to leave. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air. His encounter with this mysterious woman felt like a moment of fate, a brief but profound connection that had left him with more questions than answers. Unbeknownst to Liam, that small act of kindness, giving away his last chocolate bar, would set in motion a series of events that would alter the course of his life forever. He had no idea that this woman, this stranger, was not just an ordinary being. She was the daughter of the sovereign of Volterra, a princess of a power so vast and ancient that Liam could not even begin to understand the weight of the game he had just been drawn into. And as the sun set behind him, casting long shadows across the streets of Volterra, Liam had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. An unlikely invitation. The days following his brief encounter with the mysterious woman felt like a haze to Captain Liam Harper. The weight of diplomacy and the complexities of his mission on Volterra pressed on him, but his thoughts kept returning to the woman he had met on the streets. He had never expected such a fleeting moment of kindness to have such a lasting impact. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her pale blue skin and silvery hair, the way her eyes shimmered with an intensity he couldn't quite decipher. The city of Volterra, once a bustling hub of trade and culture, now seemed nothing more than a collection of hollow structures and forgotten histories. Liam had spent the past few days meeting with various officials, attempting to salvage some semblance of success from the deteriorating negotiations. But despite the political wrangling and endless meetings, his mind kept drifting back to the enigmatic woman. Who was she? What had brought her to the streets of Volterra in such a state of destitution? And why had she seemed so familiar, even though they had only exchanged a few words? It was on the fourth day after their meeting that Liam found himself summoned to the palace. The invitation was delivered to his quarters by an official courier, a sleek, metallic device that had materialized out of thin air in his room. At first, Liam had thought it was some sort of automated message, but when he opened the device, he was greeted by a holographic projection of a towering figure, the unmistakable face of Sovereign Reltar, the ruler of Volterra. "Captain Harper," the Sovereign's voice boomed with a tone of authority. "You are cordially invited to attend a private meeting at the Sovereign's palace. Your expertise and insight are required for matters of great importance. We look forward to your presence." The message was clear, and though it was not an invitation Liam could refuse, the way it was delivered left him with a sense of unease. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had learned long ago that it was often the unexpected that had the most significant consequences. As Liam made his way to the palace, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. His mission had been strictly diplomatic, negotiations, trade agreements, alliances, but ever since that chance encounter on the streets, things had taken on a different flavor. The city's grand palace was a sight to behold, with its towering spires, intricate alien architecture, and bioluminescent energy fields that shimmered like an ethereal dream. Everything about the palace exuded power, wealth, and mystery. It was a stark contrast to the city outside, where the streets were worn and cracked, a testament to the years of conflict and neglect. Liam's boots echoed on the polished floors as he walked through the massive hallways of the palace, guided by silent attendants in flowing robes. The air here was cool, almost artificially so, and the scent of strange perfumes filled his nostrils, mingling with the soft hum of advanced technology. He passed through high-ceilinged chambers, each one adorned with alien artifacts and ornate sculptures. The palace was a place of opulence and history, the kind of place where the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to discuss matters of state. When he finally entered the reception hall, the sight before him took his breath away. The space was vast, its walls lined with glowing crystals that pulsed with light and time with an unseen rhythm. Ornate gold arches stretched high above him, their designs intricate and impossibly symmetrical. It was a place that felt both ancient and futuristic, as though time itself bent to the will of the sovereign. Liam felt small in the presence of such grandeur, his usual confidence momentarily wavering. And then he saw her. Princess Illyria. She stood beside Sovereign Reltar, her regal presence impossible to ignore. Gone was the ragged cloak and dirt-streaked face he had seen her in on the streets. In its place was a gown woven from fabric that seemed to shimmer with the light of distant stars. The gown clung to her lithe frame, flowing with an elegance that defied the harshness of the planet. Her blue skin gleamed softly, as though kissed by the light of the twin suns, and her silver hair cascaded down her back in gentle waves. She was a vision of grace and power, radiating an aura of both strength and mystery. Liam's heart skipped a beat when their eyes met. The same silver eyes, liquid, hypnotic, locked onto him, and for a moment, he was caught in their gaze, unable to look away. There was something in her expression that was both familiar and unsettling, a recognition that he couldn't explain. "Captain Harper." Sovereign Reltar's deep voice interrupted his thoughts. "I am pleased to see you again. Allow me to introduce my daughter, Princess Illyria. She has taken a particular interest in your generosity." Liam's mouth went dry. He hadn't been prepared for this moment, for the revelation that the woman he had helped on the streets was not just some beggar but the daughter of the ruler of Volterra. He had given her his last nutrient bar without knowing who she was, without knowing anything about her. The very idea that he had shared his last morsel of food with a princess was both absurd and humbling. "Princess," Liam managed, his voice unexpectedly strained. I didn't know who you were." Illyria's lips curled into a smile, the corners of her eyes twinkling with amusement. "It is of little consequence," she said softly, her voice a melodic, almost hypnotic lilt. "What matters is your kindness. Not many would offer something so valuable to a stranger, let alone someone like me." Liam felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He had thought nothing of it, just a simple act of kindness, but now he realized how far-reaching that small gesture had become. Sovereign Reltar chuckled, his deep voice echoing through the grand hall. "Indeed, Captain Harper, it is not often that we see such selflessness in these troubled times. But my daughter has been most impressed by your actions. We have much to discuss, and I believe you will find the conversation quite enlightening." As they moved further into the palace, Illyria fell into step beside Liam. He couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she moved, her posture perfect, her presence commanding attention. There was a quiet power about her that Liam had missed in their earlier encounter. The princess was not just a ruler's daughter. She was a force unto herself. "You must be wondering," Illyria said, her voice low and almost conspiratorial, "why we asked for your presence. You see, my father and I have been following the Earth Trade Federation's progress in this sector for some time now. And your mission here, well, let's just say it has caught our attention." Liam's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." Illyria's silver eyes glinted with intrigue. "I think you will, soon enough," she said cryptically. "You see, Captain Harper, there is much more at stake here than simple trade negotiations. My people have a long history of conflict with other species, especially humans. But you've shown that not all humans are like the rest. There is something in you that intrigues me." Liam could feel his pulse quicken at her words. He was no fool. He understood the implications of what she was saying. The stakes were much higher than he had imagined. His simple act of kindness had set something in motion, and now he was standing in the middle of a web of political intrigue that stretched far beyond anything he had expected. As they continued through the palace, Liam couldn't help but wonder what his role in all of this would be. Illyria had made it clear that she was not just interested in him because of his diplomatic mission. No, she was interested in him on a deeper level, a level he wasn't sure he fully understood yet. Whatever game was being played, he had just been drawn into it. And there was no turning back. And in the depths of his mind, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. The stakes were rising, and the consequences of his next move would ripple through the galaxy in ways he couldn't begin to fathom. Growing tension. The days that followed Liam's arrival at the Sovereign's palace were a blur of diplomacy, uneasy alliances, and ever-growing curiosity. What had started as a routine mission to negotiate trade agreements with the people of Volterra had evolved into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. The Princess Illyria was no longer just a curiosity to Liam. She was an enigma that tugged at him, stirring emotions he hadn't expected to feel, and pulling him deeper into the political web of the Volterrans. Liam spent the following days immersed in a whirlwind of meetings. Sovereign Reltar, a towering figure with an air of authority that seemed to fill every room he entered, had insisted on discussing Earth's potential role in the future of Volterra's trade routes. Volterra was a system of immense strategic value, and the Earth Trade Federation had been eyeing it as a key hub for resources that were in short supply across the galaxy. The talks were delicate, and each word, each gesture, was scrutinized for its potential implications. But while the trade talks continued, the underlying tension in the air was palpable. Illyria, though often present at the negotiations, was not a passive participant. Far from it. She seemed to be constantly studying Liam, her intense gaze never straying too far from him. At first he assumed it was simply curiosity. She had, after all, been intrigued by his act of kindness. But as the days wore on, he began to sense that there was more to her interest than met the eye. Every time they spoke, even if it was about something as mundane as human customs or trade practices, her questions were calculated, probing, as though she were trying to unravel some secret hidden deep within him. The more he interacted with her, the more Liam found himself on edge. He had been trained in diplomacy, in maintaining a professional distance from even the most alluring individuals, but there was something about Illyria that made it difficult to keep his composure. The way she spoke, soft, yet commanding, her beauty that seemed almost otherworldly, and the intelligence that glowed in her silver eyes all combined to create an intoxicating presence that he couldn't ignore. Each time their eyes met, he felt a strange pull, a connection that went beyond mere curiosity. He had to remind himself, often, that he was there on a mission. He couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud his judgment. Still, he couldn't escape the fact that there was something deeply unsettling about the entire situation. Illyria was a princess, a ruler in her own right. Her power was immense, and it was clear she had her own designs on the future of Volterra. She wasn't just interested in trade agreements. She was interested in something far more dangerous, something he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. Liam had learned enough during his time in Volterra to know that the princess's family had a history of playing the long game, of manipulating events from behind the scenes. Sovereign Reltar himself was a master of diplomacy, known for his calculated moves that had kept Volterra independent even amidst the chaos of war-torn galaxies. He was shrewd, a man who never made a move without considering the potential consequences, and Illyria, his daughter, seemed to share that same ability to read people and situations with unnerving precision. One evening, after a particularly tense day of meetings, Liam found himself alone in his quarters, attempting to sift through the pile of reports and documents he had received. The weight of the negotiations pressed heavily on his shoulders, but there was something else, something deeper, that kept him from focusing entirely on his work. A soft knock at his door startled him, and before he could respond, the door slid open to reveal Princess Illyria herself, standing in the doorway with a knowing smile on her lips. "May I come in, Captain Harper?" she asked, her voice like silk. Liam was momentarily caught off guard by her sudden appearance, but he quickly recovered, standing and motioning for her to enter. "Of course, Princess. What can I do for you?" Illyria stepped into the room, her gown flowing behind her like a comet's tail. The faint glow of her bioluminescent skin cast an ethereal light across the room, and Liam found himself momentarily mesmerized by her presence. He had to shake himself out of it. This was not the time for distractions. "I thought we might talk," Illyria said, her voice low and measured. "I have a feeling we haven't truly had the chance to get to know each other, despite all our diplomatic discussions." Liam nodded, trying to remain calm. "You're right. We've mostly focused on business. But as you know, my role here is to negotiate trade agreements. Personal matters aren't exactly my focus." Illyria tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing with a faint glint of amusement. "Personal matters," she repeated, almost as if she were tasting the words. "You speak as if those are separate from everything else. In truth, Captain Harper, I believe everything is personal, whether we acknowledge it or not." Liam wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had always been taught to keep a professional distance, to avoid letting personal feelings get in the way of his work. But Illyria wasn't making it easy. Her presence was overwhelming, and her words, so deliberately chosen, were designed to make him question everything he thought he knew about diplomacy. "Perhaps," he said cautiously, choosing his words carefully, "but we both know the stakes here are high. Volterra is a critical system. The Earth Trade Federation has its interests, and so does your family." Illyria stepped closer, her silvery eyes never leaving his. "Yes, the stakes are high," she said, her tone shifting, becoming more serious. "But there is more at play than trade routes and mineral resources, Captain. You should know that by now." Liam frowned, sensing a deeper meaning behind her words. "What do you mean?" Illyria took another step forward, her gaze intense and unwavering. "You've been here for days, Captain. You've met with my father, and you've listened to the discussions about trade, about alliances, but you haven't asked the right questions. You haven't asked why we need you here beyond the Federation's interests." Liam felt a chill creep down his spine. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. He had always considered himself a capable diplomat, someone who could navigate the complexities of intergalactic politics with ease. But Illyria was right. He had been so focused on the surface-level issues of trade and resources that he hadn't stopped to consider the larger picture. "Why do you need me here?" he asked, his voice steady, though he couldn't quite mask the unease in his chest. Illyria's lips curled into a smile that was both predatory and intriguing. "Because, Captain Harper, you represent more than just Earth's interests. You represent something far more valuable to us. Something we've been searching for in the depths of the stars for centuries. And now that we found it, we need your help." Liam's heart raced as he realized the full weight of her words. Illyria wasn't just playing a diplomatic game. She was playing something much more dangerous. And he was right in the center of it, caught between her intentions and the political machinery of Volterra. Before he could respond, Illyria turned and made her way to the door, her voice trailing behind her like a whisper. "Don't worry, Captain. All will be revealed in time. But for now, I suggest you consider our conversation carefully. The path ahead is not as simple as you think." As she left the room, Liam was left alone with his thoughts. He had known that this mission would be difficult, but now it was clear that he was standing on the precipice of something far bigger than trade negotiations. He was caught in a game that could change the fate of entire star systems, and the consequences of his actions would ripple far beyond the walls of the Sovereign's palace. And as the door clicked shut behind her, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that Illyria had just shown him a glimpse of a world he wasn't ready to enter, but one he would have no choice but to navigate.